My ex-wife rejected me because I was broke, but now she apologizes and wants everything back and I don't know what to do. Emily and I met during our last year of college. We weren't anything special, just two regular students trying to figure out our futures. I was studying computer science with dreams of landing a steady tech job, and Emily was finishing her degree in communications, hoping to get into PR. Neither of us had trust funds or family connections waiting to give us a leg up after graduation. We came from similar backgrounds, hardworking families that made just enough to get by. It wasn't some big, romantic love at first sight thing. We'd had a few classes together over the years, sat near each other a couple of times, and eventually started talking. It was natural, easy. One day, I helped her fix her laptop in the library, and she insisted on buying me coffee as a thank you. That thank you coffee turned into a 2-hour conversation about everything. Our goals, our families, and what we thought life would look like in 5 or 10 years. From that day on, we were a team. Emily and I didn't have much, but we were happy. We studied late into the night, split meals when money was tight, and celebrated every small win. Whether it was finishing a tough exam or scraping together enough to see a movie on a Friday night. I still remember the time we couldn't afford tickets to a concert we wanted to go to. So we sat on a hill outside the venue, listening to the music float through the summer air. Those were the kinds of moments we lived for. It felt like we were on the same page about everything. We talked a lot about the future. Not the unrealistic kind of future with fancy cars and million-dollar houses, but the practical stuff. A steady job, a little house with a backyard, maybe a dog someday. Emily wanted to work for a big agency and handle PR campaigns. I just wanted a job where I could build something that mattered. Nothing flashy, just enough to be comfortable. By the time graduation rolled around, I was sure we'd figure it out together. Life might not have been easy, but we loved each other, and back then, I thought love could get us through anything. I was wrong. After graduation, life hit us like a brick wall. Neither of us landed our dream jobs right away. I got a gig doing IT support at a local office. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to help me chip away at student loans. Emily, on the other hand, struggled a bit more. PR wasn't an easy field to break into, especially without connections. For the first few months, she was picking up temp work at front desks and answering phones. We were both stressed but still holding it together. We'd crash on the couch after long days, eat takeout straight from the containers, and remind each other, this is temporary. We'll get there. And for a while, that hope was enough. Then things started to change. Emily made new friends through one of her temp jobs, people who worked at high-end firms and seemed to have their lives together. I'd hear names I didn't recognize. Sarah this, Jake that. Alex invited us to dinner. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was good for her to network, and maybe it'd help her land the job she'd been dreaming of. But I started to notice differences. She'd come home talking about expensive dinners, designer bags, and trips her new friends were planning. Things we couldn't afford. At first, she'd laugh about it, saying, "Can you imagine spending $300 on dinner? Insane." But over time, the tone shifted. It wasn't funny anymore. One night, we were sitting at the little table in our cramped apartment, eating spaghetti for the 3rd time that week, when she said, "Don't you ever want more than this?" I looked up from my plate. "What do you mean? Like, fancier pasta?" I joked, trying to lighten the mood. She didn't laugh. "No, seriously. Don't you ever think about having more? Nicer things? A real apartment. Not one where the pipes knock every time you turn on the water." "Of course I do," I said, feeling defensive. "But we're getting there, and it takes time. We're only just starting out." She didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied with my answer. From that point on, the tension was there. I'd catch her scrolling through Instagram, looking at pictures of her new friends drinking cocktails on rooftops or taking weekend trips to the Hamptons. Meanwhile, I was working overtime shifts just to save a little extra. We were living in 2 different worlds, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap. The real turning point came a couple of weeks later. Emily had been invited to a party by one of her friends. One of those events where everyone shows up in designer outfits and drinks champagne like it's water. She asked me to come with her, but I told her I couldn't. I had to work a shift the next morning, and honestly, I didn't feel like standing around a room full of people who made me feel like I didn't belong. "Fine," she said, grabbing her bag. I'll just go alone. That night, I sat in our apartment, the silence louder than it had ever been. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt like I was losing her, and I was right. The next few months felt like we were living two separate lives under one roof. I was focused on saving, trying to keep us afloat, and hoping things would turn around. Emily, though, was slipping further away. She was always out with her new friends, going to bars I couldn't afford, dinners at places where the cheapest thing on the menu cost more than our grocery bill. When she was home, she felt distant. We'd still talk, but it was surface-level stuff. How was work? Fine. We stopped dreaming together, stopped talking about the life we were supposed to build. I chalked it up to stress and told myself we'd find our way back to each other. I'll never forget the night it all fell apart. It was a Friday, and Emily came home late again. I was sitting on the couch, half asleep with the TV on, when I heard her keys in the door. She stumbled in wearing heels and a dress I'd never seen before. Something sleek and expensive looking. I could smell the perfume and alcohol from across the room. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, but I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. "You're late," she sighed, kicking off her shoes. "Yeah, I went to dinner with Sarah and the others." "You didn't think to text?" I asked, and immediately regretted how accusatory it sounded. "Sorry," she muttered, dropping onto the other end of the couch. It was a last-minute thing. I stared at her for a moment, wondering if this was really my girlfriend sitting next to me. Everything about her seemed different, like she belonged to some other life now. I finally said, "What's going on with you?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean this. Us. You're always out, always with people I don't know, doing things we can't afford. Do you even want to be here anymore?" The question hung in the air. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it, tell me I was being paranoid. But she didn't. Instead, she rubbed her temples like the conversation was exhausting her. "Look," she said finally, I don't know if this is what I want anymore." My chest felt like it caved in. "What do you mean? We've been together for years, Em. We talked about this. About building something together." "I know," she said softly, "but things change. People change. I can't live like this forever. Scraping by, counting every penny. That's not the life I want." "You think I want this?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You think I like struggling to pay rent? I'm working my ass off to make things better, for us. But it takes time, Emily. You knew that." She looked away, her jaw tight. "I don't want to wait. I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." I sat there, stunned. The person I loved, the person I thought I'd spend my life with, was telling me it wasn't enough. That I wasn't enough. Emily stayed at her friend's place that night. A week later, she packed up her stuff and left. When Emily walked out of our apartment, she took more than just her clothes and a few boxes of things. She took the future I thought we were building. I can't even describe what that first week felt like. Everything just kind of stopped. I went to work because I had to, but I felt like a ghost walking through my own life. I'd come home to an apartment that felt emptier than I ever thought possible, and the silence was deafening. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that she'd come back once she realized the grass is greener, life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I'd occasionally hear about her through mutual friends, how she was spending time with people who had money, going on trips, and dating guys who drove cars I couldn't dream of affording. I stopped checking her social media after a while. It just made me feel worse. If I'm being honest, part of me was angry. Furious, actually. I'd worked so hard to keep us afloat, and she left like none of it mattered. But the other part of me still loved her. I hated that about myself. I hated that no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I would have taken her back in a heartbeat. But life has a way of forcing you to move on, even when you're not ready. After Emily left, I poured myself into my work. I picked up extra hours, learned everything I could, and started building a reputation for myself. I was still doing IT support at the time, but I taught myself coding and learned how to develop software. I spent weekends building small apps for clients, and over time, I started making decent money. It wasn't overnight success or anything like that, but after a couple of years, things changed. I landed a job as a software developer at a solid company, and my income tripled. Suddenly, I wasn't scraping by anymore. I was paying off debts, building savings, and living in a much nicer apartment. I even bought my first car. Nothing flashy, but it was mine, and that felt like a win. For the first time in a long time, I was proud of where I was. I'd pulled myself out of the hole. And then, out of nowhere, Emily came back. It started with a text. I remember staring at my phone, seeing her name pop up for the first time in years. It was short, almost casual. Hey, it's been a while. Can we talk? My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard her voice in so long, and now she wanted to talk? Why? What could she possibly have to say after all this time? I didn't respond right away. I paced around my apartment for hours, trying to decide if I should even open that door again. Part of me wanted to ignore it and move on with my life. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times, the part that had once planned a future with her, needed to know what she had to say. So, I texted her back. We agreed to meet for coffee. It felt like the safest option, public, neutral, with a clear exit if things went sideways. I got there first, nerves eating at me. I hadn't seen Emily in over 2 years, and I wasn't sure what to expect. When she finally walked in, it hit me like a punch to the chest. She looked different. Not physically. Emily was still Emily. But something about her felt older, like life hadn't quite panned out the way she'd expected. I'd imagined this moment so many times, built up what I'd say to her, but all I managed was a stiff, "Hey." "Hey," she replied, offering that small, familiar smile I used to love. We sat down, and for a while it was just small talk. How work was going, what we'd been up to. It was awkward, but beneath the surface, I could feel it, this unspoken weight between us. Finally, I asked, "So, what did you want to talk about?" Emily hesitated, playing with her coffee cup before meeting my eyes. "I heard about what you've been doing. Your job. How well you're doing now." I stiffened. "And?" She sighed. "I don't know how to say this without sounding terrible, so I'm just going to say it. I made a mistake. Okay? Back then, leaving you the way I did. I thought I was chasing something better, but it wasn't." I didn't know how to respond. She continued, "Those friends I had? The ones I thought had it all figured out? They weren't as happy as they looked. The guys I dated, they had money, sure, but they treated me like I was disposable. I spent so much time thinking I needed more that I couldn't see what I already had." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. Was this really happening? After all this time, after all the nights I spent wondering what went wrong, she was sitting here, telling me she messed up? "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly, "but I wanted you to know. I see now what I lost. And if there's any chance at all, I'd like to try again." There it was. The thing I'd secretly wished for during those first few months after she left. She wanted to come back. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. But instead, all I felt was confused. I stared at Emily, the girl who'd once been my entire world, and I didn't know what to say. Part of me still loved her. That much I couldn't deny. But the other part, the one that remembered how she left when things got hard, wondered if I could ever really trust her again. "Can I think about this?" I finally asked, my voice sounding hollow. Emily nodded, her expression soft. "Of course. Take all the time you need." We hugged briefly before parting ways, and as I walked back to my car, my mind was spinning. Emily wanted a second chance. The question was, did I? The days after that coffee meeting were some of the most mentally exhausting days of my life. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. I'd think about Emily sitting across from me, saying she made a mistake, that she wanted to try again. And then I'd think about what it was like after she left. I remembered the nights I sat alone in that tiny apartment, wondering what I'd done wrong. The feeling of failure. The anger I buried so deep, because admitting it out loud hurt too much. It wasn't just that Emily had left, it was why she left. Because I wasn't good enough for her. Because I couldn't offer her the kind of life she thought she deserved. And now here I was. Different apartment, better clothes, nicer car, and a job that paid me more than I ever thought I'd make at this point in my life. I'd built myself back up, piece by piece, and I was proud of where I was. But the fact that Emily wanted me now that I was stable, now that I wasn't struggling, rubbed me the wrong way. At the same time, though, part of me still wanted her. That was the worst part. The memories of the good times wouldn't leave me alone. I'd think about the way she used to fall asleep on my shoulder during movie nights, how we'd laugh until our sides hurt over something stupid, or how we'd sit and dream about a future that seemed so simple back then. I talked to a couple of close friends about it. "Dude, you're not seriously considering this," my friend Matt said over beers one night. "She bailed on you when things got tough. You can't trust someone like that." "I know," I said, staring into my drink, "but it's not that simple." "Sure, it is. She didn't want you when you were broke. Now that you're doing well, she wants back in? That's not love. That's convenience." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew Matt was right. Then there was my coworker Sam. She was older, had been through a divorce herself, and offered a different perspective. "People make mistakes," she said, leaning back in her chair during lunch. "Sometimes we don't realize what we have until it's gone. The question isn't whether Emily regrets leaving. It's whether you can trust her not to do it again." And that was the thing I couldn't figure out. Could I ever really trust Emily again? That weekend, I sat alone in my apartment and tried to think it through logically. On paper, taking her back didn't make sense. I'd built a new life for myself. I was doing fine on my own. Why would I risk all of that for someone who'd already broken my heart once? But love isn't logical. A small part of me wondered if this was fate giving us a second chance. What if she changed? What if we could start over, stronger this time, because we both understood what we'd almost lost? I thought about texting her more times than I can count. I'd unlock my phone, type something out, then delete it. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever choice I made would change everything. In the end, I decided I needed to see her again. One more conversation. If I was going to make a choice, I wanted to be absolutely sure. I texted Emily to meet again, and we agreed on a quiet park nearby. I didn't want a crowded cafe or somewhere loud where it'd be easy to avoid the real conversation. I needed answers. She was already sitting on a bench when I arrived, looking down at her phone. I took a deep breath before walking over, trying to steady myself. "Hey," I said as I sat down beside her. She smiled faintly, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Hey." For a moment, we sat there in silence, watching people jog past us, parents playing with their kids. It was strange. This woman sitting next to me had been part of my life for years. She'd been my person, and yet now, she felt like a stranger I didn't quite know how to talk to. Finally, I broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said." Emily nodded, her face serious. "And?" I turned toward her. "I need to understand why you left me." Her shoulders tensed. She looked away, staring out at nothing, before finally answering. "It wasn't because I didn't love you, okay? I want you to believe that." "Then why?" I pressed. "Why did you walk away when we were supposed to be in this together?" She sighed, her voice quiet but steady. "Because I was scared. I watched my parents struggle their entire lives, barely making ends meet, fighting over bills, sacrificing everything for so little. I didn't want that to be my life too. When I met those people, the ones who had money, success, I thought that was the answer, that having more would make me happy." I stared at her, taking in every word. She turned back to me then, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, regret. "But I was wrong," she continued. "Those people, they weren't happy. Not really. I got caught up in their world, and for a while, it felt exciting, like I was finally getting somewhere. But you were right. It was all surface level. Those guys I dated didn't care about me. They cared about showing me off like some kind of trophy. And every time I looked around, I realized I'd thrown away something real for a life that was fake." She swallowed hard, her voice shaking slightly. "I thought about you all the time, wondering if you hated me, wondering if you'd moved on. And when I heard how well you were doing now, I just decided to come back." I finished for her. Emily flinched at how blunt I was, but I needed to say it. "I didn't come back because of the money," she said quickly. "I swear. I came back because I realized what I gave up. I see now that I was wrong to leave. I was selfish. I let my fears get in the way of what we had, and I don't expect you to forgive me for that. But I wanted you to know that I still love you." and I'm willing to prove it if you'll let me. For the first time in the years since she left, I saw Emily for who she was. Not some villain who'd walked out on me, but a person who'd made a choice she regretted. A person who was, maybe, just as lost as I'd been back then. I didn't know what to say. For a long time, I sat there in silence, staring at the grass under my feet. She'd said her piece. She'd laid it all out on the table, and now it was up to me to decide. Part of me wanted to believe her, that she'd learned from her mistakes, that we could start over and build something better this time. But another part of me, the part that remembered what it felt like to be left behind, wondered if I'd ever be able to trust her again. I don't know, Em, I finally said, my voice low. I don't know if I can do this. Her face fell, but she nodded. I get it. I do. Just think about it, okay? We didn't hug when we said goodbye this time. I just watched her walk back to her car, and as I stood there alone, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could take her back, start fresh, let myself believe that love deserves a second chance, or I could walk away. The next few days were brutal. I went back and forth in my head 100 times, maybe 1,000, trying to figure out what the right decision was. Emily's words stuck with me. I still love you, and I'm willing to prove it. Once, those words would have been enough to erase every doubt. I used to think love could fix anything, that as long as two people cared enough about each other, they could weather any storm. But experience had taught me otherwise. I kept asking myself, what if she's changed? What if this really is a second chance at something real? But then the other voice would come in, the one I couldn't ignore. What happens if things get hard again? What happens if I lose my job, or we hit another rough patch? Will she leave me again? I thought about everything I'd worked for since she left. The nights I'd spent alone, questioning my worth. The times I had to scrape myself off the floor, bit by bit, until I could stand tall again. I had built myself into someone I was proud of. I had gotten to this place without her. And then it hit me. It wasn't about Emily anymore. It was about me. For so long, I'd carried this idea that if she ever came back, if she ever apologized, it would somehow fix everything. Like her validation would prove that I was enough all along. But now that she had come back, I realized I didn't need it. I didn't need her to see my success or regret leaving me to feel whole. I'd already done that on my own. I sat with that thought for a long time, and the weight of it felt like freedom. The next evening, I texted Emily, "Can we talk? I'll come to you." She gave me her address, and I drove there, feeling strangely calm. It was a small apartment, not unlike the one we'd once shared, and when she opened the door, she looked hopeful. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." I stepped inside, and we sat at her small kitchen table. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then I looked her in the eye and said what I needed to say. "I've thought about everything, Em. About us, about what happened, and about what you said." She nodded, holding her breath, waiting. "I'm not angry anymore," I continued. "I don't hate you. I don't even blame you. You made the choice you thought was right at the time, and I've made my peace with that. But I can't go back." Her face fell, and for a second, she looked like she was about to argue. But then she stopped herself. "I spent a long time building myself back up after you left," I said gently. "And I realized that I don't need you to prove I'm enough. I don't need anyone to prove that. I'm happy with the life I've built, and I don't think I can risk that to try again with someone who walked away when things got hard." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. "I understand," she whispered. "I really do." We sat there for a moment in silence, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said finally, standing up. She nodded, forcing a small, sad smile. "You too." And that was it. I walked out of her apartment, got in my car, and drove home. I didn't feel regret, and I didn't second-guess my decision. It felt right, that night, as I sat in my apartment that I worked for, that I built for myself. I felt something I hadn't expected, peace. There was no dramatic goodbye, no lingering heartbreak, no what-ifs. It was just done. I'd walked away, and for the first time, I realized how far I'd come, not just in terms of money or success, but as a person. When Emily left me all those years ago, I thought I'd never recover. I thought I'd always feel like the guy who wasn't good enough. But sitting there that night, I understood something important. I was good enough. I always had been. I just hadn't believed it until now. I realized something else, too. Emily didn't ruin me. She pushed me. Her leaving forced me to face some of the hardest moments of my life, and I came out the other side stronger. I didn't resent her anymore. If anything, I was grateful. Not because she came back, but because I now knew I didn't need her to feel whole. Over the next few weeks, I thought about her less and less. Life moved forward. Work was busy, friends kept me grounded, and I started saying yes to new opportunities, things I wouldn't have made time for before. One night, a friend invited me to a small get-together. It wasn't anything fancy, just beers and burgers at someone's place, but it felt good to be around people again. I laughed, shared stories, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying a weight I couldn't shake. And then, at one point, I caught myself thinking about Emily, not with regret, but with a strange sense of relief. I'd loved her, and for a while, she'd been a huge part of my life. But just because something was good once doesn't mean it's supposed to last forever. I didn't need to hold on to the past anymore. Looking back, I know I made the right choice. If you'd asked me years ago what I'd do if Emily ever came back, I would have said I'd take her back in a heartbeat. But now, I know that walking away was the best thing I could have done for myself. Sometimes, the person who broke you can't be the person who fixes you. And that's okay. If you're reading this and thinking about what you would have done, I get it. Part of me wrestled with the same question. Do you take back someone you still love, even if they hurt you? Or do you let go and trust yourself to keep moving forward? For me, letting go was the only answer. And honestly, I've never felt stronger. What would you do in a similar situation? Share your opinion in the comments.